Sup, chooms? How y'all living? Hope everything is Nova and you're all having a preem week. Oh yeah, before I start, check out this Witcher mug. Isn't this cool? That's the symbol of the White Wolf, the School of the Wolf, the Witcher School located in Kaer Morhen. Definitely a cool looking symbol. Alright, anyways, as a lot of you guys probably know, there is absolutely no shortage of bro science when it comes to the subject of hair loss, especially bro science online. Hair loss is a big industry, and there is no fortune to be had just by telling people that they could save their hair by just taking finasteride and minoxidil, even though it is true. Those two treatments absolutely work, and they work extremely well. The fact is, though, is that hair loss isn't some big enigma. On the contrary, it is a very well understood subject. We know the progression of hair loss in individuals who have androgenic alopecia is contingent on the hormone DHT, dihydrotestosterone. So ultimately, if you want to stop androgenic alopecia long term, you have to lower DHT. And the safest way to do that is through the use of a 5-AR inhibiting drug like finasteride. That's it. That is literally all you need to do. Finasteride is safe and it works extremely well in the vast majority of people who use it, and this is based on both the initial clinical trials as well as doctor and patient follow-ups as well as testimonials. In the rare instance where finasteride isn't enough, you could add a growth stimulant like minoxidil, or you could use a stronger 5-AR inhibiting drug like dutasteride that can be used safely up to doses of 2.5 milligrams daily. There are promising upcoming treatments on the market that are not 5-AR inhibitors like pyrrolutamide or GT20029, as well as the Wnt pathway inhibiting drugs. But even though these drugs work differently from finasteride, they still work by either targeting DHT on the scalp or by going after the downstream effects of DHT. And this makes sense because even though finasteride isn't a perfect drug, the fact is that 5-AR inhibitors are at the moment the best thing we have out there to safely lower DHT on the scalp. It's that simple. So when looking at hair loss forums as well as some of the hair loss related content on YouTube, you still have a lot of people who want to convince you that fighting hair loss is not simple and that there's a lot more to it than just simply lowering DHT. And so they present their own alternative theories or treatments, and not surprisingly, most of these so-called hair loss cures or remedies turn out to be nothing more than repackaged versions of the bludflow theory in disguise. So if you haven't heard of the bludflow theory, I've done several videos on it, which I'll link below. But basically, the bludflow theory is an old and obsolete theory that was invented before there was any knowledge on the biochemistry of hair loss, and it proposed that male pattern baldness was due to a lack of blood on the scalp. Once it was discovered and verified that male pattern baldness was really due to the effects of DHT on the genetically sensitive hair follicles of the scalp, the proponents of the bludflow theory changed the goalpost, and they then decided that the bludflow theory wasn't the cause of hair loss, but rather instead that bludflow was the reason hair loss occurred in specific locations on your head, namely the vertex, because of the supposed lack of blood, which was causing the 5-AR enzyme on the scalp to produce more DHT in those regions. Now, I've gone over all the reasons why this theory is ridiculous, and I'll touch on some of these reasons in this video, but once again, you can get more details from my earlier videos, but just know that the bludflow theory is an obsolete theory designed to sell scam products and programs to people who have been duped into believing that clinically proven treatments like finasteride are either too dangerous or ineffective. Anyways, like I said, the bludflow theory fans keep moving the goalposts when their theories are debunked, and so they keep changing the causes of decreased blood flow to the scalp that supposedly causes hair loss. For example, they blame hair loss on tense muscles clamping off the arteries of the scalp, or tension in the gallia aponeurotica, or skull expansion, or the force of gravity, or who knows what else. One of the most bizarre variations of the blood flow theories I have ever come across, though, is the theory that dental malocclusion, meaning what happens when your teeth aren't aligned properly, is what actually causes baldness. This weird idea is propagated by someone named Brian Dye, who turns out to be a certified dental technician who works in British Columbia. He posted a video on YouTube about his theory, which I'll link below. He also published a paper on the subject, which just goes to show how low of a bar there is to get a paper published. Maybe it is time we as a society seriously take a look at raising the standards of what it takes to qualify as an actual medical editor. Well, despite this bizarre theory, it looks like Mr. Dye is very sure of himself because he says,
"This video is 100% factual because every component of this video is measurable. And if you can measure something, it's a fact."
Wow, that's really interesting. So if you can measure something, it is a fact. Well, sure, but there is a difference between just making some measurements and proving that there is a relationship between malocclusion of your teeth and hair loss. Proving that one thing causes another thing is one of the hardest jobs in science. I mean, it took years to prove that smoking caused lung cancer, so other than some measurements, I really hope that Mr. Dye has something more than just measurements to prove his damn theory. So anyways, Mr. Dye goes on to explain in the video that there are 3 positions of the jaw. A normal position where the upper and lower teeth are aligned, which is a type 1 position, another position where the lower jaw is too far back, which is a type 2 position, and a third position where the lower jaw is too far forward, which is a type 3 position. You can see an image of the 3 positions in these images from his video. Next, he spends about 3 minutes of his video showing a weird clip of 2 people eating stuff with some kind of device in their mouths and spitting food all over the place. Finally, after 21 minutes, he mentions blood flow. But as it turns out, this crap video is only 23 minutes and 22 seconds long, so not much time left to prove his theory. But anyways, being that this dental malocclusion thing is basically just a recycled version of the bludflow theory, you probably already guessed what his theory is based on. That's right, he's basing it on the superficial temporal artery thing, which I've talked about a million times already. And what this is, it's just one of the blood vessels supplying blood to the scalp. And the artery lies just in the back of the joint where the lower jaw hooks into the skull, so the jaw is too far back, which happens in a type 2 malocclusion. The artery will be pinched off and you will lose blood flow to your scalp and lose your hair. But time's running out in this video, so his proof of this theory better be pretty convincing and pretty quick as well, because we're all running out of time here.
Complete occlusion of the superficial temporal artery means you're going to be or already completely bald. Partial occlusion of the superficial temporal artery means you will retain some of the hair on the vertex of your head.
Wait a minute, that's it? He just shows a couple of pictures of bald guys next to a picture of the temporal artery and claims that if you occlude your temporal artery, you will go bald, and if you partially occlude it, you will go partially bald. After this, absolutely no data is given, just his closing remarks.
I think the future looks bright with this new information. It gives the worried patient some hope, and it gives new direction for an occupation to specialize in.
Okay, so he's basically saying this is something good for the profession of orthodontics, which just by coincidence happens to be good for him as well, since he works in that profession. But surely he has more data than just this. Maybe there's some good info in the comments section. Let's go ahead and take a look. Oh, well, you look at that. He's so confident in his theory that he doesn't even allow discussion about it in his own video. It's funny because Paul Taylor, who is another proponent of the Bludlfow theory, also disables comments on his video he made promoting his pseudoscientific skull expansion theory that I debunked in a video which I'll link below. So now I see why they all believe in scalp tension being a cause of hair loss, because they're all thin-skinned. Although to his credit, at least Paul Taylor hasn't tried to sue me yet. Okay, anyways. To be fair, Mr. Dye published a paper on this, so it's not just a video, and there's certainly better data in a published scientific research paper than a YouTube video, so let's go ahead and take a look at it. Here it is right here. Alright, so in this paper, he points out that no one has ever thought that a dislocated mandible could occlude the superficial temporal artery and cause hair loss. My Google search reveals that he is right. No one before this article or after this article ever thought about this, and we'll see why. But let's give Mr. Dye his chance to present his case. Well, he gets off to a pretty bad start here. He says, quote, "Despite overwhelming evidence highlighting the importance of vascular perfusion to the scalp in order to circumvent hair loss, little research has been conducted regarding varying anatomical vascular landscape of the scalp." Unquote. What overwhelming evidence is he talking about? He doesn't provide any references for this whatsoever. Is this just his opinion, or does he get his scientific research from other con artists who also like to pretend they have somehow discovered a hair loss solution outside of the drug model, like HairGuard or Rob English? It's clear this guy is just a dentist who doesn't know anything about hair loss, but sees some business potential by repackaging the obsolete Bludlfow theory as being linked to jaw structure so he can present himself as being an expert on the subject in hopes of resuscitating his dying orthodontics business. So next, He states that 85% of the blood flow to the scalp is from the superficial temporal artery, and he uses the same figure that he shows in his video. As I showed in my other videos on blood flow to the scalp though, there are many sources of blood to the scalp besides the superficial temporal artery. And even this figure that he uses shows that there are anastomoses, meaning connections between these vessels. So even if you lose an artery, the blood gets there by these connections. Also, like I've shown before, you don't even need your superficial temporal arteries. They are routinely tied off for a cosmetic procedure if they are too prominent in some individuals. And these arteries are biopsied by doctors to diagnose some forms of blood vessel disease, as you can see in this text on how the biopsies are done. The artery is tied off and a segment is removed. The artery is not put back together again because it is not necessary. So you can totally obliterate the superficial temporal artery without having any effect whatsoever on your hair. And this has all been medically documented and verified. So Mr. Dye is way overestimating the importance of the superficial temporal artery, and he doesn't even show what it would have to do with hair loss anyways to begin with. But let's go ahead and take a look at his methodology anyways. So he proposes that with a type 2 relationship between the jaws, where the lower jaw is too far back, the temporal artery would be pinched off, while with a type 3 relationship where the lower jaw would be too far forward, this would provide plenty of space for the artery. So what he did was he looked at men in his orthodontic practice, and he found 100 men who had hair loss. He doesn't mention anything about Norwood grades, whether their hair loss was androgenic in nature, or any other details about these men, except that they were all over the age of 30, and presumably, since they were at an orthodontist office, they had some kind of problem with their tooth alignment. The control group was 50 men with class 3 jaw alignment, meaning their lower jaw was too far forward, which according to Mr. Dye's work would mean that there was plenty of room for the superficial temporal artery to run its course. But Mr. Dye states specifically that these 50 control individuals also had no hair loss. So why not include men with class 3 jaw alignment who also had hair loss within this group? Does Mr. Dye seriously think no one with class 3 jaw alignment ever has hair loss? That's extremely hard to believe. And to be fair, he never says that people with class 3 jaw alignment never had hair loss, but I think he's really trying to imply this by selecting his control group this specific way. I think a much better study design would be to look at men with and without hair loss and see what the frequency of class 2 and class 3 jaw alignments were in each group. But we're stuck with his weird study design, and this is probably the best study we're ever going to see on this subject, since no real researcher will ever take this subject seriously. So let's just go ahead and roll with it because it's all we have. So anyways, all these men had their jaw misalignments diagnosed by visual inspection or dental models or by x-rays. Looking at the results, 96 out of the 100 men with hair loss had a class 2 jaw alignment. Of course, all men with preserved hair had a class 3 jaw alignment because that's how the control group was designed apparently. So this is 96 out of 100, which sounds like a lot, but apparently that wasn't good enough for Mr. Dye because he did more analyses of some sort or another and writes, quote, "A more thorough evaluation of the 100 individuals, those with or without class 2 dental malocclusion, through analysis of their skeletal cephalometric radiographs, revealed that all 100 subjects selected for inclusion present with class 2 skeletal malocclusion." Unquote. So 100%. Sounds 100% factual, doesn't it?
This video is 100% factual.
Wrong! This isn't in the least bit convincing, but Mr. Dye is happy with his findings and notes at the end of the paper that research into hair loss genetics doesn't mention that things like dental malocclusion are genetic too. Based on these weak arguments, he concludes that based on his study, if we just correct jaw alignment early enough, we should be able to prevent all hair loss. So, not surprisingly, there is no mention in his research paper about the role of DHT in hair loss, which has a mountain of data behind it, and yet we are supposed to believe his hypothesis just because the patients he selected from his practice who had some degree of baldness had a class 2 jaw alignment, while the other ones he selected with class 3 alignment and normal hair had, well, guess what? They had normal hair. Sorry to say it, Mr. Dye, but this all sounds like complete broccoli to me. So there are obviously some major problems with this study. There are multiple things wrong with this study. First, It is an observational study where subjects were selected retrospectively by the investigator and then classified by the investigator using either dental modes or x-rays. We don't know how accurate these techniques are or how subjective they are. However, we do know that Mr. Dye obviously seems very biased towards his hypothesis that dental malocclusion causes hair loss, so he probably shouldn't be the one picking and evaluating the subjects in a study like this to begin with. It would be kind of like having a study on post-finasteride syndrome where you choose subjects from the goddamn Propecia Health forums who already have a negative opinion about finasteride to begin with and thus causing massive selection bias issues. But I'm sure that would never happen, right? We also should be very skeptical of any claim that a hypothesis like this is 100% accurate in determining which subjects had hair loss. There really is nothing in medicine that is 100% accurate, so hearing this guy say 100% sounds more like marketing than science or medicine.
This video is 100% factual.
A better study design would be to take 100 or 200 men coming to a dental clinic, do dental x-rays on all of them, have someone who doesn't know their x-ray results evaluate whether they have hair loss, and have someone who doesn't know their hair status evaluate their x-rays. Then you can look at the results and see if there is a correlation between jaw position and hair loss in a non-biased way. An even better test than this, though, would be to just do Doppler flow ultrasound studies of the temporal artery blood flow in people with different jaw structures to see if there's any reduced blood flow in the temporal artery if the jaw is set too far back. I mean, we have no idea if the jaw position really does impinge on the temporal artery or whether this is just something Mr. Dye made up. But all this is just a complete waste of time anyways, because like I've already showed many times on this channel, the temporal artery is not even important for hair growth to begin with. The blood supply to the scalp is redundant and therefore not dependent on one single artery. You can cut off blood flow to one and blood flow will just increase in the others. That is why ligation surgery of the superficial temporal artery does not cause hair loss. Also, there is not enough dental malocclusion in the world to account for the amount of hair loss there is in the world. Androgenic alopecia is extremely common and occurs in about 50 to 60% of all men based on numerous studies, but only about 20% of the population have any malocclusion at all, and of those, only 20% have a type 2 malocclusion. So that works out to be only 4% of the population who would even have this type 2 jaw alignment in the first place, which isn't enough to explain the over 50% incidence of male pattern baldness. So Mr. Dye's theory isn't just physiologically impossible, it's logistically impossible, because we know that far more than 4% of the population has androgenic alopecia. And truth be told, I think what Mr. Dye is saying, he knows it's bullshit, but he's just hoping the people who watch him will be so blown away by his dental knowledge, which he certainly has, and they'll therefore forget that knowing a lot about dentistry doesn't mean you know anything about hair loss. So I guess when you're a hammer, everything tends to look like a nail. And furthermore, when you are an orthodontist, every disease looks like it's due to a dental problem. So maybe this guy is legitimately convinced by this theory that he's created, which is sad because it really shows that the dental education system has failed him. But just like chiropractors who think that you can cure asthma by manipulating the spine, there is no connection whatsoever between your teeth and your hair, and don't expect that you'll save your hair by getting your teeth strengthened. So Mr. Dye's theory is way out of left field, obviously, and there is, as far as I can tell, no legitimate scientist looking into this theory seriously. It's about as silly as the fucking skull expansion theory, which I already debunked. But anyways, the only place this theory tends to get shared around is on hair loss forums as well as subreddits, and this is due to the fact that the majority of people who are on these forums are sad, balding losers who cannot overcome their fear of finasteride, and they have to grasp at whatever false hope they can find to help themselves cope with their decision to not use finasteride. And look, I can understand all this. I used to be afraid of finasteride as well, and the thought that we can cure our hair through natural means, such as just through improving blood flow to the scalp, is a very comforting thought. Sometimes the red pill can be a very tough pill to swallow, but if you're serious about fighting hair loss, you need to accept the reality that 5-AR inhibitors are the best thing we had that are clinically proven to stop hair loss long term, at least the best thing at the moment. There are far brighter people than this dentist or any of the bro scientists you see on on the hair loss forums who are researching real treatments to stop hair loss. And I have covered many of these promising treatments on my channel, so nobody should think that I am some finasteride purist who thinks that there's no way nothing better can ever come along. But if something does come along that is better than finasteride, it will be due to the collaborative efforts and the talents of the world's best doctors, pharmacists, and chemists, and not because of some random dentist or some random guy on Reddit who writes about broccoli while getting basic hair loss research wrong. And it certainly isn't going to be from some wannabe researchers who think they're experts because they submitted a couple articles to some Z-list medical journal that also publishes AIDS denialism papers. So I can see why certain orthodontists are trying to cash in on people's fear about finasteride by offering them false hope about natural alternatives. And that is because orthodontics in general, as a business at least, is failing at the moment, mostly due to products like the Invisalign that allow at-home teeth straightening that is much easier and cheaper than traditional orthodontics. And that recently came off patent, so it is cheaper and more widely available than it used to be. This article about Invisalign here states that this has disrupted the entire business model of the orthodontics industry. So it's no wonder orthodontists are desperately flailing around trying to find something else that they can make profitable. So why not try to scam hair loss sufferers who are either too stupid or too dickless to just use a clinically effective treatment and instead try to revive obsolete and dead theories like the bludflow theory? I mean, wow, if straightening your teeth would prevent you from losing your hair, wouldn't that be a huge cash cow? If only people were stupid enough to believe it. So let's go ahead and get an orthodontist who sounds like he knows what he's talking about to promote it. Unfortunately, just like every other gimmick that promises to stop hair loss by improving blood flow to the scalp, it doesn't work in practice, and it doesn't even work in theory. So don't be fooled, chooms. Stay skeptical of online scammers and bogus research. Your hair doesn't have enough time for you to dig around with unproven nonsense based on false theories like scalp tension, sulforaphane, blood flow, or dental malocclusion. I'm here telling you these things because my goal is for you to keep your hair, and I know your best chance of succeeding with this is to rely on clinically proven treatments backed by the most research like finasteride and minoxidil. The hairline fraud cells who promote the blood flow theory are scammers whose goal is to make money, and that bottom line is contingent on people not using clinically proven treatments that work. The last thing any of these snake oil salesmen want is for you to use a treatment that actually works, because then there will be no reason for you to try out the garbage that they're peddling, as well as the false hope that they're offering. The red-pilled, uncomfortable reality of hair loss is that there is no drug-free alternative to treating hair loss. So if you're going to keep on trying to save your hair using utter natural bullshit that doesn't work, like scalp massages and broccoli, then you might as well just give up and just shave it, bro. Just learn to cope with being bald instead of wasting your time and money on worthless garbage, and admit you never had the balls to start finasteride because you chose to put the fate of your hair in the hands of internet bro scientists and believe worthless anecdotal evidence rather than trust treatments that have already been clinically proven to work time after time again. And with that, I'll see y'all next time, my fellow hair loss witchers. Take care.